Ron, tell us about you. Tell us about your where you were born, growing up, going to school, and all that.
I grew up here in Dallas. I was one of the few native Dallasites. I am a twin. I have a twin brother who's also a lawyer. He and I grew up in the Park Cities area, but Highland Park. He went to SMU. I went to the University of Arkansas. I came back to SMU Law School, and then during the between my second and third semester of law school, they had a summer internship program, and they literally would pick a name out of a hat on one side, a lawyer, and then a name of a student out of the other hat, and put them together for a summer internship program. And that's how I met Charlie Tesmer, just absolutely random choice. And that's how I became a criminal defense lawyer, because I had no earthly idea what I wanted to do up until I spent that summer working with Charlie. It was supposed to be a summer job. I lasted 5 years with him.
Well, how did you decide to go to law school?
Well, I don't have any great stories. Like I heard Milner's story about how he used to ride down to the courthouse and as entertainment during the, I guess this had been during the 40s, and watch trials. Something was happening when I was in undergrad school called Vietnam, and if you stayed in school, there was the less chance that you got drafted. So, I don't have any great, like, it was really, I didn't particularly want to be drafted, so I went to law school. And I have to admit, I'll bet 90% of the people in law school had the same story if they're being honest.
Now, your brother Tom is a lawyer also. He practices in family law, correct?
Right. Well, I call it anti-family law, but he does family law practice.
All right. Repeat the question so that so between your second and third year of law school, they just randomly matched you up with Charlie Tesmer?
Right.
And that meant that you spent the summer working with Charlie?
Right, $6 an hour.
$6 an hour. Well,
he continued that pay structure for me until I graduated from law school. I'll add. So.
But tell us a little bit about how your relationship with Charlie Tesmer developed.
Well, I literally didn't know who he was at all, and I go down and interview with him, and of course he's got this huge, deep voice, and he's a memory that I've never met anybody who had the same type of memory he has on it. And he's very impressive when I was with him, so I made a confession the first time I met him. The first sentence I did is, "Mr. Tesmer, I know nothing about criminal defense law." He says, "Don't worry, son, I'll teach you everything you need to know." And I didn't realize how true that statement was. When I got back to law school at the coffee shop out there at SMU Law School, and I sat down and told some of the people, I'm going to work for Charlie Tesmer, and some of the professors heard about it, and they're all as happy as they could be. They couldn't believe it. Everybody knew about this lawyer except me, about how good a trial lawyer he was. So, and he was, I know there may be some objection or some disagreement about it, but I think he was the premier criminal defense lawyer in Dallas at the time, at least courtroom law.
Well, I don't think there could be any legitimate disagreement about that. Well, when did you get out of law school?
1970.
I got out of law school.
I got out of law school in 1970.
And you did what as the first thing in your career after you were licensed?
Actually, let's go back. Well, I was still working for Charlie during that summer. This is '69. He handed me a file and said, "Write a motion to dismiss on this case," and it was a motion to revoke probation. And so I with nothing to go by. The other lawyers in the office were not what we would call book lawyers at all. I basically was introduced to a library. I went in there and I wrote a motion to dismiss and a motion to revoke probation. Ultimately, that case is tried, or the hearing is heard in front of Judge Chamberlain, I believe. And the case gets reversed. The motion to revoke is granted, and they revoke the kid's probation. It's appealed, and the case is reversed on the motion to revoke probation that I wrote. So it's kind of like the first trial I ever had in front of Judge Gossett. Was a murder case, and he sustained my first objection. I've been objecting ever since.
Well, that's just interesting as it can be, how in 1970 you had that wonderful opportunity. Who else were you working with in Charlie's office?
Frank Wright was in the office. He and Tesmer were partners. I didn't do much work for Frank, but since the office was so small, physically small, you got to know everybody. There was a lawyer named Wiley Stufflebeam who was working for Charlie. He's an older lawyer, and basically got people out of jail for Charlie. They would do the initial contacts, sometimes the initial interview, but that's basically, he didn't try cases. Later, Mr. Stufflebeam was replaced with Noel Portnoy. And then in Frank's office, Kevin Clancy came in shortly after I did, working for Charlie. Kevin Clancy started working for Frank Wright, and Kevin was a classmate of mine at SMU. And then ultimately, I think Bill Bratton came in to work with Charlie Tesmer. So, and now I office with Bill Bratton. So we're kind of an incestuous group. So.
How did you tell me what your earliest, most impressionable experiences were as a criminal trial lawyer in Charlie's office?
My first impressions of Charlie in trial was that they always say that you can tell who's going to win the case by who takes over the courtroom initially. And it was amazing when Charlie walked in and just started talking, he took over the courtroom. So that, I mean, my first impression is in jury persuasion is basically is that you have to have a presence in the courtroom before anybody's going to listen to you. What I ultimately learned is that I could not be Charlie Tesmer or George Milner or Bob Hinton for that matter. You had to develop your own persona to work in the courtroom, but you also had to have enough confidence where you could project to everybody else in the courtroom that you knew what you were doing, and that this was going to be an interesting 2, 3, 4, 5 days or 2 or 3 weeks of being in trial.
Tell us about your family.
Parents grew up in Rockford, Illinois. Dad got transferred down here during World War II. He was exempt from the draft, but he was in a critical industry where he had to sell basically nuts and bolts to the defense industries down here. I have 2 older sisters. They were both born up in Rockford. My mom had actually grew up in Montana, Rapelje, Montana, which is literally a crossroads that had a jail. The jail would be a one-room, we'd call it an outhouse, right, any place around here, but it was basically a one-room facility that had, a lock on it. That's where people spent the night. There weren't many people up there. It was on the plains of Montana.
How about your immediate family?
I'm married to Terry Goranson, and we got married in 1970, which happens to be the year I started practicing law, and we just celebrated I'm going to get in trouble here. I got to do this quick calculation. 37th anniversary on it. We have 2 children, Kimberly, who is now married and works for me in the office, and then a son, Kevin. They're both adopted, and we're proud as we can be of them. Well, and I got to say something else. Criminal defense lawyers sometimes, they get a reputation of sacrificing, but I don't think we sacrifice anywhere near as much as our family does on it, just because of the hours we have to put in the office to be able to get ready to defend people charged with criminal offenses where their freedom interest is the paramount concern. And every good criminal defense lawyer I know, their family has suffered because of it, because in effect it's not a 9-to-5 job. It's a profession, it's a career, and I don't care what lawyers say, they take it home with them during trial, and their families have to put up with a whole lot from us. And I have to say, with my family, they have done that. I've put them to the test. So, yeah.
Well, I think it's very interesting that you, I consider to be in my age group, but you were there at the beginning talks of these wonderful lawyers that put together TCDLA. Tell us about that.
Well, it was kind of interesting. I didn't know much about the statewide practice of law. I was having trouble finding out where the Dallas County Courthouse was. And there was a state bar convention here in Dallas, and a bunch of flyers apparently went out, or notices went out to the criminal defense bar across the state saying, if you're coming to the state bar in Dallas, come meet us at I think it was the Hilton, one of the downtown hotels, and we're going to get together to talk about, in effect, forming the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. and it was signed, I think, by Phil Burleson and Tony Freelow. There may have been some other people. Frank Maloney may have signed off on it, and some other lawyers. Tesmer got the notice, and he sent me over there to see what Phil Burleson was up to. So I actually got to sit in on that first meeting and my recollection of it, there was about 25, 30 lawyers in the room. Introduced myself to Phil and to Tony, and made the biggest mistake of my life as far as a professional part of it, is that I didn't sign up to be one of the founding members. And basically, I didn't have the money to do it at the time. I was practicing for 2 years, and Tesmer didn't pay a whole lot.
So this was in the spring of 1972?
It had been the summer of 72, probably June of 72, August, June, whatever we had the state bar convention.
Can you think of any other of the real giants in the criminal defense area that were there besides Phil?
I remember Phil and Tony gave a presentation. I really don't remember anybody else that was there, although I've met a whole bunch of lawyers who said they were there. It's kind of like Woodstock. There, of the 4 million people who were the 100,000 people that were at Woodstock. I'm sure that Frank Maloney was there, and I'm pretty sure he was announced. I mean, I'm pretty sure he gave a presentation. But the rest of them were just faces. I really didn't know who they were. I subsequently came to know that it were all the great trial lawyers in Texas at the time ended up being members right at the start.
Well, tell us how you reported back to Charlie after you had attended that meeting.
I came back and I said, I think that's something he needed to do, and he did. He and Frank both joined. They're charter members. And then 2 years later, I'm sitting in the office. I'd actually ghostwritten a couple of Tesmer's presentations for both the TCDLA and National Association. And I was sitting in the office when, I can't remember what time of year it was, but 2 huge guys walked into my office. And I thought, there were 2 hitmen that were coming after Charlie for something he had done. And it was Scrappy Holmes and Jim Bobo. As where this is going out to, are 2 now former presidents of Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. At the time, I think they were just on the board of directors, but they basically told me I was about to become a member of TCDLA. And I got out my checkbook and wrote it to these 2 gentlemen. I never met them before, but both of them become good friends since then.
Do you remember what that check amount was?
Probably $75. I would guess 50 or 75. It wasn't too much.
1974.
I couldn't tell you the year it was that I joined, but it would have been in the early 70s, mid 70s.
Well, what caused you to want to become so very active in TCDLA?
It's osmosis. I think most of the people who I consider my friends were active in TCDLA or became active in it after I did. And I'm talking about Tim Evans, Richard Anderson, Bob Hinton, Scrappy Holmes. But they, and I guess at the same time, I was also an officer of the, I think in '76, I was president of the Dallas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. I was one of their younger presidents, and it was kind of strange the way that worked. It's because Jan Hemphill was president. I think Dick Harrison, Richard Harrison was the president-elect, and I was the secretary-treasurer. But Jan didn't like to take a public presence on everything, so I did all the PR press announcements, or if there was an interview it was of interest at the courthouse. And then during Dick Harrison's, both his first as vice president year and president year, he was involved in that big criminal case in Houston where the guy poisoned the Halloween candy. So I ended up being president of the Dallas Criminal Bar 3 years on it, and it was, I kind of, I guess was making a local reputation at that time. I was doing a lot of appeals with Charlie and trying a few cases, and I'll tell you right now, doing trials is a lot more fun than doing appeals.
You talked about your family, and you talked about TCDLA. Tell us how you were able to combine both of those interests.
My kids are known as TCDLA latch kids. I mean, whenever we took a vacation, it was going to a TCDLA, generally convention or meeting someplace. I mean, there were interesting places we got to go, cruises and ski trips to Lake Tahoe, and San Francisco, and besides San Antonio and all the towns in Texas. But I mean, my kids, basically grew up with TCDLA members being their babysitters, and then they ended up being babysitters for TCDLA kids. So.
How about Terry's involvement?
Well, Terry, you're talking about the Friends now, and several of the spouses of some of the early leaders of TCDLA got together and formed the Friends of TCDLA, and Terry was with that group. Rita Evans was one, Teresa Millette, and Stan Weinberg's wife,
Joe.
And they're about 4 or 5 others anyway. But they formed a group that in effect became the Friends of TCDLA.
When did that become? When did they develop Friends of TCDLA, and why?
Well, I can't tell you exactly when it was. My guess is going to be in the mid-'80s, someplace in that time. The purpose of it, I think, is, and Rita Evans, Tim Evans might be the best person to ask this question to, because Rita was, from my perception, seemed to be the motivating or the champion for bringing the group together. But the purpose was to raise money, and what I thought the purpose was to raise money to get rid of the debt on the home office. During this time period, we had bought a building down in Austin, and it had a huge mortgage on it. And I know every president had to sign on that mortgage. Well, I was one of the first presidents not to have to sign on it, because they got it paid off just before I became president. So, and I was real happy for that.
Tell us what it was like back then in the early years of TCDLA, the financial part of it and things of that nature.
Well, the early years, first I served on the board of directors for TCDLA. I came on the board to replace Richard Anderson, who had become the next in the line of officers, secretary or treasurer, whatever the entry level was. And I finished out his term on the board of directors. Then I served 2 terms of my own. Again, I'm going to guess this time period is in the early 80s. The group was obviously a lot smaller. I think we were around 1,300 members. Of that 1,300, there were probably 300 or 400 that were relatively active, and you got to know that whole 300 or 400. Financially, it seemed like we were always a few dollars short. This is before mandatory CLE came in. Frankly, mandatory CLE is the only reason that we've got, TCDLA probably is where it is because it required lawyers to have continuing legal education. Because of that, we were able to put on seminars and also formed a criminal defense lawyers project, and both of those were huge revenue producers for TCDLA, and that then permits us to do all the other functions that TCDLA does.
Then ultimately you were president of TCDLA.
But we're not going to talk about my presidency too much. It was a legislative year. Our lobbyist had to be replaced in the middle of the legislation.
What year was this, Ron?
I think it's 96. Again, you're asking me dates. I'm old enough now where they're all kind of mixed together. Our lobbyist it became an issue, and there were a couple other issues that were going through then and shortly thereafter. But there were little hurdles that I like to think that TCDLA was in its teenage years during that time period. We worked through them. Each year we were growing membership-wise, budget-wise. And I think when I was president, I calculated it that was the first year our total budgets were over $1 million for all 3 organizations.
Tell us what TCDLA has meant to you personally, and meant to your family personally, and meant to you as a career concern. From a professional standpoint, I got to meet lawyers from I was already meeting good lawyers
basically in this area, and I was trying cases with them. But then I got to meet the good lawyers in Lubbock and Waco and the Valley, and not just, it wasn't just the Houston, San Antonio, Austin, and Dallas lawyers, Fort Worth lawyers. And because of that, it ends up being great referrals, but I also knew where to send my clients. When I had got a phone call from a civil firm and they needed a good defense lawyer in San Antonio or someplace in the Valley, or you pick the smallest town in Texas, and I had a contact there, and all I had to do was look in the directory, see who that lawyer was. If I didn't know it, if they were still a member, I could call them up, and I was on a first name basis with them the time that call was made. So I got to, through the seminars, I got to watch good lawyers teach us how to be better lawyers. I steal from every lawyer out there. If I see something I think will work in my case, I write it down, and I guarantee you I try it out in my next trial. And it works. That osmosis works. I think it's made me a far better trial lawyer.
Well, over your career, you've had a whole lot of very high-profile, interesting cases. Tell us about the ones that you think are the most significant.
This is one of the question is about most significant cases. And this is the one where I actually thought a lot about this before the interview started. My favorite case is a nobody case. It was a young man that came into my office. He was 18 years old, charged with murder. His parents helped him pay a rather modest fee by me at the time. It was a case tried in front of Judge Ovard. Typical Henry Wade prosecutors on the case. Although I can't say typically, they were doing everything they could not to try this case. But my client basically turned down a misdemeanor probation on the case. And rightly so, because he was right. It was a classic self-defense case. And we got to try it to the jury, obviously. I learned several important lessons in that trial. One is in picking a jury, if there's somebody you're talking to that fits all your requirements on a jury profile, but you still hate that person, you should strike them. Doesn't make any difference what your criteria are for what your perfect jury should be. This was a self-defense case. I had an old man right next to a North Dallas stay-at-home housewife woman. The old man fit all the criteria. He was male rather than female because of self-defense and crimes of violence. He had prior jury experience, which in my case was helping because I had the kid. My kid had no record, but the deceased had already had a trip to Huntsville for armed robbery, and so I didn't feel that a prior criminal record was going to hurt me in the case. Prior jury service was going to hurt me in the case. When I'm talking to the old man, I had bad vibes. I mean, the karma was just not working, but he fit all my criteria. And I went by science rather than by art in picking the jury. The woman right next to him is a woman I struck, and I just absolutely loved her. She was smart, intelligent. We had a good conversation. She was not too much into self-defense, but she listened to what the facts were on it, and that was probably the biggest mistake. You can guess what the verdict was in this case. It was 11-1 for not guilty, and the holdout was that old man who went up to the prosecutors afterwards and told them, I knew Henry Wade would not send you young men down here to try an innocent man. We tried it to the judge the next week to a not guilty. But basically the judge said, why don't you try this case to me? I knew it was a good idea because after the state had put on their third witness in the case, they asked for a short continuance so they could go find the state's next witness. And in front of the jury, where the jury could hear it, Judge Ovard said, I haven't heard the state's first witness yet. So anyway, but that was one case I was proud of. The first case I tried by myself, and I thought I did a good job on it. Almost, like I said, almost got there on it and got the not guilty the next week, and the kid was able to lead hopefully the rest of his life. The second deal I did in that case was a little different. At the time, we didn't have a lot of cameras like we've got going in here on it, but I went and spent about $1,000. This came out of my own pocket, about $1,000 of my own money to rent a video recorder, and video recorded him as I did him on cross-examination. I mean, direct examination and a cross-examination. And it's one of those deals where the tape, you do it the first time you look at it, and then watch it the second time after he's seen himself on videotape, and it's like night and day. He saw exactly everything I've been trying to tell him he was doing wrong. He saw what it was, and was bright enough to be able to decide that maybe what I was telling him about how witnesses should act on the stand was a better way of approaching it rather than what he was trying to do. And obviously made a difference in front of the jury too later on. But that's when I first learned that there are things out there that can help us be better lawyers. It's not just how smart the lawyer thinks he is.
You know, Ron, there are a lot of lawyers who are good courtroom lawyers, and there are a lot of lawyers who are good library book appeal lawyers. You've got a reputation of being very good at both of those. To what do you attribute that?
Tesmer, mainly, and George Miller. I've been fortunate, and I want this to come out. I have had the privilege to practice courtroom law, defending the citizen accused with some of the greatest trial lawyers in America. I'm going to include you in that group, Bob, because you and I have tried a case together. But Charlie Tesmer, I think, is one of the best criminal defense lawyers ever in America. George Miller is right beside him. George is I watched George try cases with Charlie, with Racehorse Haynes, with Billy Rafkin, another great criminal trial lawyer from Dallas. And I saw all three of those lawyers let George do the cross-examination on the critical witness. And the reason they did that is because George was absolutely wonderful on cross-examination. And I got to sit and watch him do that for, God knows how long, it seemed like 15, 20 years. And it was, you almost felt like you had to pay for the privilege to sit second chair in those cases. And that's with Charlie and with George both. But you learn by watching the good lawyers do it. But you don't really learn until you start doing it yourself. But I was amazed to find out how much some of the stuff they did, I could adapt to fit into my personality and let me use it in the courtroom also. It also helps when you're trying cases if the judge knows that if he screws up, you're going to reverse him. And at a time when the Court of Criminal Appeals would reverse cases because the state or the court could not follow the rule of law. That helped you when you walked into the courtroom and that judge knew that you knew how to preserve the error and if need be. And I don't know if the judges know it, but I've done a couple of appeals on my own when I was so damn pissed off at the trial court for mistakes that I went ahead and carried the burden, won both those cases. On it. The guy kept telling me he's going to pay me back, and I knew that was never going to happen. But I had to. It was a federal case, and he had so many judgments against him at the time that the chance of him ever having a dime in his pocket that he could give to me was going to be it'd be a cold day in Texas in the summertime.
Ron, in the 37 years that you have practiced criminal defense law, what have been the most significant changes that you have seen?
Two. One is kind of is the whole gender of practitioners has changed totally. When I first started, there were very few women lawyers, judges, or prosecutors, and that's completely changed now. But that's the same for Hispanics and African Americans also. It was a white man's club when I got here. And it's not that way anymore. So that part of it has changed from a social standpoint, social justice standpoint. The other part is a move. I don't know of a polite way of saying this, but a move away from the protections of the Constitution and almost a feeling that if you're charged with a crime, then you must serve the time, whether you're guilty of it or not. I don't see the overt racism that we had when I first started practicing. I think it's still there. another change I've noticed is that it used to be, I would be the lawyer in the courtroom that everybody looked to for the law. Now with judges having computers on their desk where I could cite a case and they could literally look it up on the bench and check out to see what I've done, is I no longer seem to have that great advantage I used to have. So.
How has lawyer advertising changed the practice, if it has?
Oh, totally. It used to be that you built your reputation at the courthouse. Lawyers would refer cases. I mean, that's where almost all my business comes from, is from other lawyers. Right now, and then somebody can come right out of law school, spend $50,000 a month on an ad or whatever they're charging for it, and have more business than they'll have more business a week than I'll have in a year of just cold phone calls.
How has that, in your judgment, affected the quality of representation?
I don't know that it has. I got to be truthful with you. Lawyers now are have far more opportunities to learn how to try a case right than they did when I first came up. There were very few criminal seminars. The Huntsville Project was not in existence. Basically, the way lawyers learned how to try cases was whoever they first got assigned or got sat with, that's who they taught them how to try a case. I don't think it's that way anymore. You have far more inputs from various sources that teach you how to be a better lawyer if you're paying attention to it. I think we still have the same number of lawyer percentage of our profession that probably should not be practicing criminal defense lawyers. They're seem to be more interested in trying to make a living rather than to be a professional in our profession. But I don't think that's changed too much percentage-wise over the years.
Ron, I've always heard people say, if you want a hard job done right, give it to the busiest person. That seems to be you. How do you square your responsibilities with your family, with your responsibilities with your law practice, and add in that ingredient of State Bar of Texas service, such as you have done for many, many years on the State Bar Grievance Committee?
Well, the question is, how do I balance the professional demands, and by professional I mean both through TCDLA, the State Bar of Texas Grievance Committee, and with the demands at the House. I really don't know how I handle that. My problem, and I think this is the problem that all good defense lawyers have, is that when the person comes in, I realize that person is just relying totally on me for their freedom interest. And because of that, I don't let it go. It comes home with me. There's not a day goes by that I'm not thinking about one of my clients' cases. Some of my family might think I take long showers just because I like long showers, but it's not. I'm trying to work out an argument or a voir dire how to do a cross-examination on somebody. And I'm pretty sure most good lawyers do that. They don't leave it at home. What you have to hope for is that your spouse is somewhat tolerant to understand that you have chosen a profession. And then you hope your kids learn about that over the years, because they'll know you're not there that. I always was able to make all the athletic events and all the extracurricular events, but there are many nights that I probably could have been helping, by reading or helping get the kids to bed and stuff like that. I wasn't there. I was down at the office. I have to admit, in the early years when you actually had to read the books rather than have the library on your computer at the house, it was a little different. But I can remember sitting in the office and literally having 100 law books, folded open. The young lawyers won't even understand it. Law books folded open and stacked under, and this stack had to do with the probable cause issue, and this one over here, when I found a case that worked on extraneous offenses, and this one was on the jury charge. And literally, if you walked in, you couldn't see me because of all the books stacked up. Now we do it all with a computer and a flick of the mouse. So it's incredible.
Tell us about what it's been like to be chairman beyond the grievance committee, but beyond there to the point of being elected chairman.
Any good person on the grievance committee, the one thought they'll have on every case that came in is I'm going to use the but for the grace of God, I could be that lawyer sitting over there. No lawyer is perfect. We all make mistakes. And in 95% of the cases that ended up in front of the grievance committee was basically a failure to communicate between the client and the lawyer, or the client having unrealistic expectations as to what the lawyer could do. And generally, those unrealistic expectations can be related back to the lawyer not adequately telling the client what the limits of the case were. So, but I mean, 95% of them are communication issues, not returning phone calls, things like that, as opposed to the lawyer going in and just being a total doofus. At the grievance committee, about 5% of what we're doing was really effective work of trying to protect the public from bad lawyers, and that 5% is probably, that's probably at the high end. Next.
That's good. You're a very frequent speaker at CLE all over the state and all over the nation in ACDL. Why do you do that?
It's selfish, basically. That's how you learn to be an expert in certain areas. That's how you stay current in certain areas. It only takes one time to be in front of a group of people and make a statement, and then come up and a guy, invariably this happens, and the guy comes up, well, there was a case last week that just reversed what you just said. You feel like an idiot on it. Hopefully that happens after the speech is made and not in front of too many people. But it's selfish to one extent. Is that one is you're learning the law because you got to learn the law to be able to make the speech. The second thing is anytime a lawyer has a chance to do anything as far as public speaking, they should do it because it helps. I think I've heard Tim Evans say, get down to the Kiwanis Club and whatever social or community organizations are out there to make speeches because it helps you every time. The other thing is, I think all of us, this is almost the 12th step of a 12-step program, but almost all of us, all of us do owe an obligation to make sure that we do whatever we can to help other lawyers become better trial lawyers, better representatives for their clients.
Ron.
The fact that sometimes they pay you to go to Hawaii doesn't hurt any either, although I never get invited to those seminars. It seems to me like I do most of mine in Cleburne and Brownsville. And I like being in Brownsville and all that, but it's not San Francisco either.
Ron, your twin brother Tom is a preeminent divorce lawyer or family lawyer here in Dallas, and is respected in that area as you are respected in criminal defense work. And he has spent a lot of time with TCDLA on ski functions and things like that, and I know that you spent a lot of time with him in his professional things. How do you think there's a difference between the level of camaraderie between criminal defense lawyers and civil lawyers?
The question is whether there's a difference in camaraderie, I can't even say the word, of how we get along with our fellow lawyers in the criminal defense work as far as with other areas of the profession. I don't know that. I can't say that from my standpoint because I'm so involved with other criminal defense lawyers. It seems so natural to me. I've been told by civil lawyers and by my brother how the family law lawyers are, is that we seem to get along a lot better than they do. And there's some reasons for that. One is we're generally not having the same economic battles they are to try to get the same clients and all that. Generally, by the time the client gets to our office, we've got the client, and we don't have to worry too much about somebody else stealing the client. The other side of that, I think, has to do with when we're dealing with prosecutors, like you and I met as prosecutors. You were a prosecutor. I'm a purist. I was never a prosecutor. But we had, but ultimately, I think most people who are prosecutors realize they're not going to be prosecutors forever. Now, some of them, it takes a little bit longer to get the message on that. So they realize that if they, in effect, take advantage of other people, that will come back and haunt them. I'm not so sure that that's a concern in other areas of practice. So, and the other part of that, I think, is Tesmer told me that if you act like a gentleman, and in our today's society, act like a gentleman or a lady, that always pays off in the long run. I've had prosecutors who acted kind of snide toward me during jury selection, and if you respond to them as a gentleman would, as opposed to as an advocate would in front of the jury, one person walks away with credibility from the jury, and that's you, not the other side. Now that doesn't mean that you can't be stern. I think the classic way to explain this is, I heard Emmett Colvin once. The very formal way of referring to a female would be madam. But when he said it with his big southern drawl and all that, you knew he was saying something other than madam. So when you knew when he used that term, he was letting the person know, and everybody else around him know, that person had not been behaving right. So I only saw him do it once, but I was impressed.
Ron, you made a comment there that I was going to go into, and I think this is so very important. You hear lawyers, criminal defense lawyers, sometimes in our seminars and just at the courthouse, bad-mouthing the prosecutor, bad-mouthing the judge, bad-mouthing this, and it seems to be it just seems you're not that way. The prosecutors, the judges know you and they respect you and they like you. Why do you do it that way?
Well, first off, you can't do it the same way every time. There are a few people out there that you just can't be nice to. But again, I've generally found out we're engaged in the art of persuasion, and if you get in somebody's face all the time, then I seldom see that to be effective. In fact, I don't know that I've ever seen it to be effective. Again, if you treat people as people, generally it comes around and you get treated that way back. If you treat them like they're some sort of lesser human being, then that also comes back to you on it. So again, I'm assuming I learned this from my mom. I'm pretty sure I did. But I also saw what I considered the truly good lawyers in Dallas, that the way they acted in the courtroom and with other individuals, in the chambers or in the DA's workroom when you're trying to get something done, is you never got it done by being in somebody's face. If you couldn't appeal to their logic, you weren't going to get what you wanted, and that's why we got jury trials, I guess. There are some cases where I don't deal with the DA gets a little upset because I just don't deal with them, because I know it's a jury trial. Why should I be wasting my time engaging in these useless plea negotiations when I know ultimately my client is going to, they're never going to be able to offer anything my client can live with, so we might as well just get down to what we're really there for. So.
Ron, early on in your career, you became known as the go-to lawyer for minority issues. Did you intend to do that? I mean, the John Wiley Prices of the world, the racially charged issues. You're the one that is foremost in everyone's mind as the person who goes to bat for that person successfully.
The question is, how did I get involved in racially sensitive cases? Would that be a fair way to say it?
Yes, sir.
I have no earthly idea how that happened. I grew up at a time when the civil rights movement was coming to fruition. I missed the marches. I was apparently a little too young and too dumb not to get involved in that. It seemed to me that there were cases in which it was absolutely necessary that the citizen accused had the best possible defense. One of those was John Wiley Price. He was been involved in a lawsuit. Misdemeanor criminal allegations. He had pretty good lawyers working for him on those cases, but with an unfavorable verdict indicated. And then a felony charge was brought against him for, basically, I think he got in a disagreement with some of the work crews on, in Dallas during one summer, we had 2 film crews in here filming the Kennedy assassination. I think one was TV, one was movie. And John got in a disagreement with one of the people building one of the sets. And I mean, when you heard the people describe it, it was almost humorous. It was like a scrum in rugby, where John and one of the people got in a disagreement, and words were exchanged, and then one of them thought the other one was throwing a punch, so it became physical, and then everybody jumped in, and it was this group of about 20 people that were kind of moving like this until it hit the curb, and some of the people saw the curb coming and stood up. Well, the guy who ended up being the complaining witness didn't, and the group, I mean, just the weight of everybody going into it caused his leg to be broken on it. And as soon as that happened, the scrum stopped, and there was no further confrontation except for one small incident. But after everybody kind of got aside and all that, and the complaining witness walked up to John Wiley and just kicked him square in the private area on it. And he was standing on his broken leg when he did that. And when you learn the facts, I found out Billy Rafkin was being the lead counsel. I just went to Billy and said I volunteered. I knew Billy didn't really know where the state courthouse was at that time. He did mainly federal defense work, so I volunteered to help him defend the case. Cheryl Watley, former assistant U.S. attorney, now a criminal defense lawyer, now a teacher at the University of Oklahoma School of Law, was one of the volunteer lawyers on the case. And then I think Joe Montemayor, so we formed our own kind of rainbow coalition. I was the designated white lawyer in the case. Billy was the designated Jewish lawyer, and then Cheryl was African American, and Joe was Hispanic. And there was another group of lawyers involved, 4 other lawyers that actually helped us in a whole bunch of things, legal research and finding witnesses and things like that on it. And they'd never get named. But I mean, that was in effect the backup crew. During the trial, I had to sit back with those lawyers. It was more fun back there because we could make editorial comments as the trial was going on. But it was fun to watch those 3 lawyers. And then, like I said, I sat in the back behind them, but I got to make all the legal objections to it. They let us play by what I call American League rules. They had a designated hitter. One of the funny things that happened during that, this was not that felony trial, but the misdemeanor walking, the crosswalk protest cases. I stood, Craig, Cheryl, I make an objection, something the state's doing, I make an objection. The judge overrules it. Cheryl Watley adds too much, stands up and adds to it. Frankly, we were right. It was a significant legal, I didn't just make objections to make objections, but significant legal problem going on. And Cheryl stands up and makes the same objection, and then Billy stands up and overrules our objections. We're all on the same defense team, and he's overruling our objections. Cheryl and I are both looking at him, what are we here for? But anyway, those 2, that team worked quite successfully. We got a hung jury, I think, in the first John Wiley felony case, and then it was not guilty in the second. And then on the jaywalking cases, that was again, the DA's office did not like John Wiley Price, and they were doing their best to get him convicted of something. So they got him for obstructing a public highway, I think, for basically they're doing protest out of Parkland Hospital to get fair wages for the employees out there. And the part of the deal was they get in the crosswalk, and it's legally, but there's nothing in the law that said how long it took you to cross the street. And so they would take their time crossing the street singing freedom songs when they're going through there. And the DA made the bad mistake of cross-examining John on that and asked him something like, well, why don't you tell the jury or sing to the jury what the song was that you're across the street? And John, he said, well, I can't really do that by myself. I have to have other people helping. And Cheryl Watley held up her hand and said, I'll help. And I held up my hand and said, I'd help. And there are about 15 people in the jury. They're all holding up their hands saying they'd help. And here the poor DA is looking around and going, what have I got myself into? Well, that was a not guilty verdict too. The jury wanted to sing along with us too. So.
Ron, another one of the very high-profile cases that you were intimately involved in was Michael Irvin.
Right.
Tell us some of your high impressions of that case.
It was a case that should have never happened in the first place.
The Michael Irvin case.
Michael Irvin case, yeah. One of the people involved in the the search of the place, had confessed to possessing the drugs involved on it. Someplace, somebody made some comment that that Michael was being, somebody made a comment someplace along the way that the DA's office was trying to, was prosecuting the case just because it was high profile. And basically Mike Gillette was the prosecutor involved in the case. Mike took personal offense to that. And so he decided he would, this is my opinion of what happened, is he decided that he was righteous and that Michael was actually the most guilty person and therefore should be prosecuted. Michael Irvin is one of the, it was fun to represent him. I wish it hadn't been in those circumstances. But he was a very interesting individual. I mean, he came from a large family. He was obviously the most successful, economically successful person in the family. And but he had people coming up to him all the time. I mean, you could not walk any place with him without somebody coming up to him. I've never seen anybody that gracious with other people. He truly was a gentleman to the public. There's some other public officials right now that could probably use that kind of training on it. But the case went, I was quoted, and there were 4 defense lawyers in it. Part of the problem was trying to balance the egos of the trial lawyers. But I got to do got to do all the legal arguments on it, including one of the motion to suppress evidence in the case. It was kind of fun to use some techniques I'd seen other lawyers across the state do, is to try to show an example of why a police officer knocking on the door continually for 1.5 to 2 minutes was more than just a police officer trying to find out if anybody was home. But I got quoted all over the United States with that particular argument. I can't say it got me a lot of business, but it was kind of fun.
Ron, this has been one of the quickest hours of my life. I wish it could go on, but the last thing I want you to tell us is, what would you say to the young lawyer just starting out practicing criminal defense law today?
First off, the way I did it is to get a good mentor. I was lucky to get Charlie Tesmer, and then the second mentor being George Milner. That is, I think, invaluable and makes it so much easier. The other thing is to go watch other lawyers try cases. Don't just sit in your office waiting for the phone call to ring. Go down there and actually watch and see what they do, because those who are purists and don't go into the DA's office. The DA's office, you just get thrown in and you have to start trying cases. So hopefully your super chief or whoever is teaching you how to do it will be the ones that learn how the right way to prosecute cases as opposed to the one who learned the wrong way. So,
how you want to be remembered as a criminal defense lawyer?
That I cared about my clients. It really is that easy. You could write that on my gravestone. That, along with he never had a hole in one. So.
Thank you so much. Excellent.